Welcome to this explainer. I want you to imagine waking up tomorrow, grabbing your phone, and seeing the absolutely impossible flashing across every single screen on Earth. Ukraine has captured Moscow. Not bombed it, not threatened it, literally captured it. The political heart of one of the planet's biggest nuclear powers just suddenly under Ukrainian control. Honestly, just saying it out loud kind of sounds like the opening line of a fever dream, right?
But what if it actually happened tomorrow? Let that sink in for just a second. Because if that one specific event happened, we're not just looking at a battlefield victory. No way. The shockwave would not stop at the Kremlin gates. It would rip through history, through global markets, alliances, and literally through the minds of leaders and everyday people everywhere. The world wouldn't have days to react. We would have minutes.
So let's look at Section 1, the epicenter, the collapse of belief.
Okay, let's really dive into this. For us to even reach this point, multiple overlapping layers of Russian air defense, internal security, and command systems must have already completely broken down. So the real question isn't just how did they do it, but what exactly has already broken inside Russia. There's this fascinating concept that hits the nail on the head here. Power in a capital city is not only built on tanks and missiles, it is built on belief. The belief that the state is firmly in control. Once that belief dies, the atmosphere on the streets of Moscow instantly turns to pure chaos. You see, it wouldn't start with soldiers, it would start with a total, absolute collapse of confidence.
The unraveling happens in terrifyingly fast stages. First up, disbelief. People are just frozen, staring at the news. Then, boom, instant panic. And that triggers mass evacuation. You'd have citizens flooding train stations, jamming highways, rushing airports, just completely desperate to escape. And then, a total system freeze. The city's everyday rhythm evaporates, traffic gridlocks, cell phone networks completely overload and crash. Rumors start spreading way faster than facts, and government officials simply vanish behind locked doors. The whole shebang just stops.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Russian vacuum and the breakdown of the state.
Picture the Kremlin. It's the ultimate symbol of Russian identity and state control. If that falls, the whole myth of invincibility vanishes entirely. The central government goes into total shock. Now, we'd likely see the leadership frantically relocate to secure undisclosed sites, but the real danger, that's the fracturing into competing power centers. Suddenly, regional leaders stop listening to the center, and they start calculating their own survival. It creates this incredibly dangerous vacuum where opportunists, survivalists, and defectors all rush in, all while the state is desperately struggling just to hold itself together.
But right here, this is where the danger crosses a truly terrifying threshold. Who controls the nuclear chain of command now? When a nuclear state faces the actual loss of its capital, the danger doesn't just end with a military defeat. Make no mistake, this is the exact moment the danger becomes greatest.
Every single intelligence agency on Earth would be scrambling in absolute overdrive. Has the leadership relocated? Are competing orders being given right now?
Are early warnings being misread? Are the military units even still under centralized control? In a crisis of this massive scale, dealing with one of the largest nuclear arsenals on Earth, uncertainty itself becomes a massive existential threat to us all. The world needs absolute confidence that those weapons are secure, and confidence is literally the one thing no one would have.
Let's shift our lens to Section 3, the victor's burden. Ukraine's unmanageable crisis.
Because look, a force entering a capital doesn't just inherit power. It inherits immense responsibility, deep-seated hostility, and the massive risk of endless, grinding resistance. So what actually comes next for Ukraine? Do they attempt a full-on occupation? Do they try to force a negotiation? Is it a quick strategic withdrawal? Are they pushing for regime change or holding the city hostage for ironclad security guarantees? As history shows us, victory in war does not automatically equal peace. In fact, reaching Moscow might create a brand new, even more volatile crisis.
So, the crucial point to take away is this. Controlling a city is one thing. Controlling a superpower's collapse is something else entirely. Any advance into the capital immediately triggers a highly dangerous aftermath, loaded with a devastating human cost for millions of civilians whose basic systems like food, water, medicine would be completely disrupted overnight.
Which brings us to Section 4, the global shockwave, markets, alliances, and panic.
When Moscow falls, nobody assumes it's just a localized regional development. The entire world instantly enters emergency mode. The dominoes fall immediately in the global financial system, way before the political system even catches its breath. Stock markets completely plunge, oil prices surge, gold explodes upward as investors desperately flee to safety. airlines frantically reroute flights mid-air, and shipping insurers just smash the panic button.
This instantly builds into a frantic diplomatic race against chaos. Every single nation has to react urgently to prevent civilization from losing its balance. Allies face agonizing decisions. Do you support Ukraine too much and risk global nuclear escalation, or do you hold back and look like you're abandoning a key partner? Neutral countries would immediately call for emergency ceasefire talks. Meanwhile, other nations would either quietly celebrate a historic geopolitical reversal or watch in absolute horror as the entire global security order completely collapses in front of them.
And this brilliantly illustrates how truth itself fractures in the propaganda war. Both sides would absolutely rush to dominate global media. You'd have the Russian narrative framing this as a betrayal, an external catastrophe, and a true civilizational emergency. On the flip side, the Ukrainian narrative frames it as the ultimate culmination of survival, resistance, and long-awaited justice. Social media just becomes an absolute battlefield of manipulated clips and non-stop, breathless speculation.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the paradigm shift, the end of certainty.
Beneath all the day-to-day politics and the immediate military strategy, an event like this forces a sweeping historical conclusion. It forces every single military doctrine on Earth to be entirely rewritten. Fortresses are no longer guaranteed, capitals are no longer untouchable, and distance no longer means safety. This fundamentally terrifies governments everywhere. Because if a heavily fortified capital like Moscow can fall, then absolutely no capital is entirely secure. What really strikes me here, what's absolutely crucial, is that it triggers what we can define as a psychological earthquake. That's a sudden, global realization that our world is incredibly fragile, that major global powers can be shocked, and that history can literally turn in a single day. This isn't just about lines on maps anymore, guys. It is about the sudden violent destruction of the stories that nations tell themselves about safety and permanence.
The age of assumptions is over. Once the impossible becomes real, there is simply no going back to the version of history that existed before. Global markets, armies, political leaders, and everyday citizens will never think, speak, or trust in the exact same way ever again.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. If the first impossible domino falls, what does the rest of history look like when it comes crashing down? Think about that for a moment. Thank you so much for joining me today. If this kind of deep scenario analysis pulls you in, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss our future explainers. I'll see you in the next one.